Hello, digital warriors, and welcome back to the Forge of Unicorn podcast. Today we have an exciting guest, John Cowan. And John is the managing partner and founder of NextWave. It's an interesting sector what John is touching because it's the first one that I am interviewing that is working in the field of machine economy. John, welcome. We are really proud to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Michele.
It's a pleasure, man. Especially because you bring here a lot of interesting concepts, especially because your kind of sector where you are investing is not something that we are used to discuss about. For instance, you have in your portfolio a company that is tubular network, and is something that is revolutionizing the last mile logistic through aerospace partnership. That is something that I want to discuss about. But also you have an interesting company also that is Cron AI. That seems to be the typical company that use the leverage of Gen AI, but because I know you, it isn't.
No, it's definitely not generative AI, that's for sure.
Indeed. So I want to let our listener to understand better who is John and which kind of interesting business you are managing in this field of machine economy. Please, John, introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. My name is John Cowan. I am, as Michele said, I'm the managing partner, co-founder of NextWave Partners. NextWave is a venture firm that is in the middle of entrepreneurship, innovation, and investment. We work with very talented founders to help them build and accelerate the innovative technology companies that they aspire to build. We are focused intently on what you, as we used to describe, the machine economy, or what you might broadly reflect upon as the emerging era of autonomy or autonomous systems. We believe the future of the digital economy is going to be machine to machine, as opposed to necessarily human to human, which will be orders of magnitude greater than anything that we've ever conceived before in the history of the internet. Bigger than the telco boom, bigger than the cloud, bigger than social, bigger than mobile, perhaps combined, actually, when you think about the number of machines and devices that will be required to manifest this era of autonomous living, autonomous coexistence.
It's an interesting field, and I have to tell you that I start to get involved in this when I did my graduation in the high school, because I went into the high school to do an experimental high school that was electronic, electrotechnic, and informatic IT. And there they were starting to have this idea of robotic automation and like system, like you go in the parking lot, you leave the car, and then the car with a platform is parked by itself. That was, I guess, the seed of what now we can call it machine economy. Isn't it? Or is something even more?
Yeah, machine automation is its own sort of evolutionary curve. Automation is at the core of technology and innovation. We strive to automate to get better efficiency, better scale out of the processes and the technologies that we employ generally in business. And logistics is no different. I mean, the idea you could think of the idea of moving a product or a good manually or over legacy style conveyor systems as honestly antiquated caveman style technology in the future of machine to machine. Automating that process is something that our portfolio company has invented as a new field called hyperlogistics. Right, the idea where again in the aerospace example that they like to talk about, taking a company that would normally require weeks to move a component from one area of the campus to the other area of the campus. If you think about just the process involved, boxing, loading, inventory, trucking across the campus, unloading, unpackaging, verifying, assuming there's no mistakes, and often there are. That is a wildly inefficient, antiquated process. The concept of hyperlogistics that Tubular invented is designed to shrink that down from days and weeks to minutes with 99.9% success rate and accuracy. And as we all know, in industry, time and production is money. So for industries that they're focusing on, they're making a big difference through machine automation.
Yes, absolutely. And for people out there that maybe they are not so knee deep into the topic, I want to bring a real life example. I'm restructuring my office, and in the process with the construction site, I have to move things around, a lot of packages, delivering, and whatever. I'm in a country where I had this kind of experience. Then we can compare with the experience that Tubular Network is providing for reference. I have the construction site with the general construction on the site. They are doing all the stuff. They have to order pieces here and there. And then suddenly arrive a truck, is unloading stuff. And they have to check everything manually. Paper and pencil.
And they might have RFID, but it's still manual. They're still scanning things physically, and
here is manually.
Piece of paper.
They count the item on the pallet. Yes, they count the item on the pallet, and they check that everything is okay. Phone call, they update the warehouse, and after a while, I receive in post on the paper an invoice. Last day, the invoice was written manually. Today at lunch, before having the call with you, I got a call from a company. Hey, Mike, you didn't pay the invoice. Which invoice? I didn't have this invoice in my inbox. Good. We have to check it out. After a few hours, they understood that the invoice wasn't sent by post. Now, we are in 2025. Gen AI is showing that people are still thinking that they can do a startup with vibe coding, talking with Gen AI chat, and the code is ready for production, probably for a prototype, but not for production. I am living in a place where people are sending me a truck and then the invoice on the paper, written by hand.
Yes, this is what we're witnessing is what we refer to as the genesis stage of a technology paradigm. In the genesis stage of the paradigm, I would classify where we are now as late genesis stage, but it's still ad hoc in some cases. It's still rudimentary. It's still very much unknown by the masses. And in some cases, companies are still trying to figure out how this either makes or saves money. It's very unrefined, it's very raw, right? And you see that in coding, especially, right? I'm a firm believer that the evolutionary curve of AI is going to greatly broaden the field of future developers that exist in our industry. But it's fantastical to think that you're going to go from, hey, I'm a bookkeeper now, and tomorrow I am going to build a software that lands rockets. That is, it's a dream, right?
A nuclear power plant.
Yeah. Trust me, it'll work. Famous last words.
Or it will blast.
Yeah, you'll have a blast doing it. Trust me. It is, so we're in this stage, right, where, things are chaotic and unorganized and, I would say, to some degree, almost fantastical. But, to do what we do is not to be focusing entirely on the moment. What you have to see and focus on is, what this looks like 10 years from now. What is the long curve look like, in this industry? And, if history is a great predictor of future state, which I believe it is, I think we know how this is going to evolve, right? We've seen this before play out in the last 40, 50 years in multiple industries and multiple fields. And I do believe that the integration of artificial intelligence is going to greatly broaden the field of developers in our industry and hopefully bring with it the kind of creativity that multidisciplinary professionals can bring to development.
In one sentence, you have touched so many concepts that I need to reorg my mind. Because one point that you touched that I record in my parking lot for the further question was, okay, standards, raw. And the field indeed, especially in software and in the kind of business that we are witnessing nowadays, is really fluctuating. If we compare what we do with automotive or healthcare, we don't have any standard. Nothing that is a standard that we can ensure quality. Nothing that is almost a standard that can ensure the software is able to integrate with other systems. And we are living, especially now with this agent and AI agent, in a field where high integration is demanded. And in your field, I guess this is even amplified because you have things that are moving around other things. It's machine to machine. And they don't understand if you shout to them. It's not a dog. Then perhaps after a while and some cookies will understand what you say. It's a system and you need to integrate them. And it's not automotive like you integrate pieces of different ECU with the canvas. Do you see this as a problem that is slowing down the adoption of your business segment?
Well, it's not unique to my business segment. I think it's germane to our entire industry. And again, I am as a venture builder, I'm a first principles sort of professional or thinker, if you will. And so it's hard for me to not look at the root cause of some of these issues, rather than just observe the challenges and the symptoms, the friction that we experience in trying to create fully integrated systems and what have you. So, it strikes me that, in order for this world to fully interoperate and succeed, the one that we foresee, in our own research, in our own investing thesis, there needs to be standards. Without standards, we can't possibly scale. Imagine, for instance, if there was no TCP/IP and every city or campus or had its own version of the internet. Okay. Where would we be? We probably would not be doing this call today, quite frankly, if that was the case.
No, maybe with a telegraph in Morse.
Yeah. I love carrier pigeons, quite frankly. But so that's a great example. The internet itself is a great example of how standards done right can create economies. And so the issue that we face kind of going forward is this sort of decision about who gets to create the standards. Okay. And we've fallen into this trap. I call it the unicorn trap, if you will, of I want to create my own walled garden and I want this to be proprietary and I want this to be my thing because I'm going to get rich doing this. And so therefore I need to convince the world of my way of doing it. And we've fallen into this trap, if you will, of every company thinking that way. All right. And so, so we could theoretically just yield to one of the big tech companies or two of the big tech companies and live and operate and build in an oligopolistic style standards framework. If we just, it'd be easy. Like, if I was working at Amazon, I would say it's easy. Just adopt my standards. Or if I was working at Google, I would say it's easy. Yeah, I mean, we already created the standards. Just do this. And the problem with that is that it ultimately kills innovation and creativity, right? We need a dense plurality of thinkers and innovators to manifest this future. And we need to do it with open standards and participatory programs and systems and platforms, right? Similar to the way in which, again, I think about that decision. I think about the decision to effectively open source, IP, TCP/IP, and that is, to me, that's right up there. That is right up there with sharing the plans to split the atom for nuclear power. I mean, it's right up there as a selfless, society changing decision that was made to do that. And so, we absolutely have to embrace a similar approach to foster standards and accelerate or grow, interoperability, and ultimately develop the systems that, again, will change society in the era of autonomy.
Yes, I strongly believe that the way forward is open source, especially because we don't have these standards. What I am observing in the last 2 decades is that almost the larger majority of companies out there, small and big, okay, they don't know how software should be built. And the funny part is that in your kind of business, if a robot doesn't move, you can shout to the robot, but the robot will not move. But if you shout to a developer that they are doing crappy stuff, that they have to be faster, that they have to understand requirements that are not understandable, a developer will figure it out how to make it working somehow. But the somehow is bringing down the perception of what is shippable out there. Somehow something that is just enough to survive, or has to be something that is really well tested, like an electric device. If the electric device will do a shortcut and your house will get in flame, probably after a while, after a lot of burnout here and there, due to equipment that is not safe, somebody will say, okay, now we create a standard. That is roughly how it went with the Industrial Revolution to improve the safety of the electric equipment. Not yet in software. Because I believe that there's this human factor that is like a spring in a shock absorber that is absorbing this friction between human and machine. Isn't it? Or I am wrong on that?
Well, yes and no. I think you're correct in your observation. I think you are distilling that observation acutely. But I would also add to that in saying that there's also a human to human disconnect in this, in the sense that if you've ever observed, it's the social experiment of putting, a software developer in the room with a financial expert, for example. Okay. Yeah. There's a disconnect, in the way that one professional works and the other professional works, which missets expectations, which creates distrust and these kinds of things. So I think in the long-term resolution of what you're talking about, there also needs to be different systems for the human-to-human interaction, right, in creating these standards and developing these kinds of solutions.
Yes, that is indeed the beauty that was out there with the idea of agile software development. I mean, the Agile Software Development Manifesto, written in 2001, with the capital A removed, was still agile as an adjective, not a noun, not something that we sell.
Yeah, here's the disconnect, though. Right? So agile, in our experience, in my experience, agile is a very, very difficult thing to translate to a non-developer professional. I mean, can you imagine showing up to a board meeting and saying to the board, as a C-level executive, saying to the board, you know what? We'll generate revenue when we generate revenue. And that would be a developer's approach to explaining when we're going to have revenue, when it's there. Okay. And so that's part of that human to human disconnect. Okay. And so agile by itself is, and I am a practitioner of Kanban. I am a firm believer in agile methodology, all of its principles, 100%. But I've strived over many years to try and translate Kanban and agile to have cross-functional impact. And for me, that's really only attainable when you layer a different practice on top of agile. And for us, and for me, that is the practice of objectives and key results maintenance, OKRs, right? When you provide that sort of framework, what you do is you give agile the necessary structure to be useful to somebody that is not a developer.
Yes. I am in awe now because you touch two of my core tenants. So, agile for the sake of agile. So, I sell you a Scrum or Save. No, it doesn't exist. So, it's a mutation, a Frankenstein of what it was the spirit of the Agile Manifesto. Especially because these frameworks typically are totally oriented to provide somebody that lost the control of the process with tools that provide them the perception of getting it back. Indeed, extreme programming is gone from the picture because it was providing technical tools to developers.
Well, and everybody wants you to buy a tool. Everyone thinks that you can solve these problems with a tool. And there is a full menu of these tools out there for you to use. But here's the thing about OKR and Agile that I think very few people who enter that world fully appreciate. There's a reason why they call it a practice. Okay. It's like yoga or martial arts. Okay. There's no finish for this. There's no completion. Okay. It's like software itself. It is a practice. It is a discipline, and you get out of the system what you put in. Right. So it requires curation. It requires dedication. It requires a level of, organizational commitment to have any value whatsoever.
Yes. And as a professional martial art trainer, I see how teaching martial art or teaching software craftsmanship or agility or going and coaching a board that is in a stage of conflict, what I call the board war. When you step into these boardrooms and you feel the tension, you say, okay, I know what is going on here. Let me see these reports. Okay, I see KPIs as vanity metric. Where is the lipstick? Who has the lipstick in the pocket? So these are stuff that indeed you touched the good point. It's the human-to-human communication that is broken. And I love a book that is the 5 Dysfunction of a Team from Patrick Lencioni. The first layer of the dysfunction is when the trust is broken. So what I observe in this organization is the people that you go on the field, you observe how people they behave, and you see that they're completely strange.
100%. Well, we're humans.
It's like you wake up a morning and you look at your right, and in the bed there is your wife, but behaves completely different like a stranger. And say, okay, what is going on? Then you go in these companies and they seems to be a company, an organization, people that are working together, but they are totally disconnected. Like you bring water and oil in the same place.
We call that the silo. It's the silos inside of organizations, right? And startups are not immune from this. We see this every day, right?
Yes, I see a good ingredient to create the silos is authority.
Yes. Whoever created the corporate org chart, concept, the hierarchy of personnel, I'm not sure ever really built a startup before.
But you see, this is funny. I love history, as you know, and I love philosophy. If I observe something in history, is that the society emerged from the behavior of people that they need to survive an hostile environment. From the prehistory to today, we can discuss who has created the hostile environment. If they were the predator, then the predator became another human. But this is something that we can avoid for the moment. Otherwise, we go in a very Socrates.
We're going to need another hour.
Yes, we go in a Socrates-oriented discussion here. But the point is, when you arrive to a development of a society, there is always something that is in charge. In the past, who was in charge was the guy that was putting the skin on the game. Because they have to survive. Now, who is in charge? How much skin in the game is putting? Is a role model or is a tag on your badge? You are the CEO, the CTO, whatsoever. If you have this tag and you don't behave with the right behavior that you want to see it in your company culture, how do you pretend that the fruition of your company is something that you didn't see it?
Yeah, it's obviously extremely challenging. I mean, I'm a firm believer in that. I'm a firm believer that to build high performing, dynamic teams that don't ever leave, that don't quit and go work for Google or whatever, you must build a flat organization, and you must, and this is where things like OKRs and Kanban play an important role. You must foster transparency, right, across the organization. Nobody works, there's no fiefdoms and there's no silos. So stand up should include the controller, the CFO, right, the head of human resources, okay, chief legal counsel, that they should be in stand up also, okay. And so by fostering that kind of culture and that kind of transparency, I think you begin to solve some of those challenges that you observe organizationally that eventually lead to stifled innovation and stagnation and those kinds of things. But I would also say that the difference between leadership and not leadership in a flat organization is really the communication and execution of the vision, right? So if when I look for founders, I'm looking for the founder that I want to work with. The founder that I want to work with is the founder that isn't just saying, "Hey, I have a great idea and I built a prototype." It's the founder that can convey that in a way that gives other people a sense of purpose and belonging, and that is super important, right? And that's an organizational trait. If a founder does that really well, that will transgress across departments and I'll say domains, focuses, expertise in an organization. But it starts with, that's who the real leader is in the organization, is the person who has that ability to articulate the vision and convince others that the purpose is worthwhile.
I love this concept, and I tell you what I observe in the two fields where I am doing the almost same job, coaching people in the IT sector, but also coaching and training people on the martial art. And in the martial art, I have a lot of experience working with army, police, spec ops. What I see in this sector is in stark contrast with what I see in leadership in organizations. Because in the sector of army, police, defense, a leader is somebody that is fully engaged in the mission. The purpose is in their bloodstream. They are sharing it with the people that they are working with, because all of them, they risk their life in what they do. When instead you go in an organization, you see like the aristocrats and the normal people. And this is something that all the time is a behavioral indicator, a sociometry indicator that I put on my observation book. When I see it, I know by definition where the company will be. I don't need to see a chart with the financial indicator. I know that the culture is toxic. On human side, they can be a very productive company with a stock price that is skyrocketing. But living there is a dual traction environment. Power versus labor force. Are we returning the Roman emperor where was the slavery? I don't see gladiator in the corridor. So something is in stark contrast between this kind of well-being concept. You were saying that the board needs to understand it, but I saw a board one day. They were discussing for the well-being to put the table soccer in their coffee corners. If a boardroom needs to understand and discuss about this because they start to see the disengagement of people, it means that we are really, really on the edge of the cliff.
There are some problems there.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. It might be too late by that point.
And the point that you were also discussing before is that people are looking for a tool, for a solution. Yes, isn't it the principle of the actual medicine? I go to the general practitioner, I go to an expert, I have pain somewhere. And what they provide? First off, painkiller. If we look at the sales of painkiller,
treat the symptom.
Yes.
Treating the symptom.
Instead, agility and the real mastery in engineering is based on the concept of continuous improvement, Kaizen. And the Japanese, they have even three words for the concept of continuous improvement. Typically, we use only Kaizen and Keikaku, so continuous improvement or radical change. But for us, it's something really strange. We don't have even a word about this.
So the continuous improvement is obviously an important hallmark of the operating systems for companies that you and I, share a common bond over. But I would also say that in the building of the organization, the concept of continuous learning is really important. So, whenever, as a founder, when I hired somebody, it was important to me to make sure that they understood that everything that I know about building companies, articulating vision, making presentations, whatever the topic is, that I would be an open book. And, my goal was always to, have somebody graduate from our organization, either more well-rounded or more worldly in their perspective of venture building. Maybe they learned about financial systems. Maybe they learned about investing and they're a developer. Maybe they learned about sales presentations and they're an accountant. That kind of continuous learning, I think, it's something that is unique to startup organizations because of the ability to move at high velocities, and that should be an attractive selling point, if you will, for people to come and work inside of a startup. Otherwise, it sounds like a crazy idea to go work for a company that has no money and is constantly trying to survive. Who wants to go do that? Well, anybody who wants to learn should go do that.
Exactly. And I will continue to keep parking my parking lot the concept of OKR, because we will get there, because I want to discuss about something related to the key results and how to craft them. But the point that you just touched is intriguing to me. I have this idea. It's an observation working with kids and seniors, especially kids that they are still at school. I'm challenging the school system here, because are almost 15 years that I am working with the latest technology, or the latest discovery, not technology, let's call it properly, about neuroscience, the concept of neuroplasticity. And we know that the actual school system is not working following the principle of neuroplasticity. We know that the school system is putting kids in front of a challenge, them against the others. You need to score the highest grade. And if you don't do, you are an idiot. Nobody will tell you because it's unpolite nowadays, but the message doesn't mean that doesn't pass because nobody tells this. It's between the lines. If you get a 5, you are immediately the last of the band. So we let them grow in this kind of field where they are against the others. And we return here to the concept of human versus human rather than human with human. So social programming versus egocentric society. And then we move them through kindergarten, primary school, high school, university, and whatsoever. And then they arrive to the work field. Egocentric, full of their achievements. I was always the first grade. I took everything highest grade, and now I am here to show you that I'm the best. Buddy. But you have to cooperate with the others. It's not a show. is collaborative work. Because nowadays the complexity of problem that we try to solve is so high, so dense, that alone you cannot do anything. You need a team, a multidisciplinary team, otherwise you have only one ingredient of a recipe that requires a lot of people in the room. A startup cannot be only engineers. So, do you see that successful startup, they have people with a key ingredient that I call critical thinking?
100%. So 100%. So there's a lot to unpack in that conversation. Okay. So what I would generally say first is that the concept of education, of the teaching human beings, is not any different than the field of medical science or the field of nuclear science. Okay. It's similar in the sense that it has to evolve and adapt based on, the experiential data of doing the practice. For example, if we were having this conversation, I don't know, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, we might be talking about the way to treat a headache or the way to treat, a mental disorder is to drill a hole in someone's skull and stab their frontal lobe. And that is the state of the art to treat the problem. Okay. We know now, looking back, that is not the way to do that. Right. So treatment, through innovation and through understanding and through experience evolves, and the practice evolves. Right. The education system itself, how we train human beings, also needs to evolve. Now, I wouldn't go as far as saying we don't need, disciplinary experts in fields. We absolutely do. However, the root of that is absolutely critical thinking. It is absolutely the ability to, I'll just say this, the ability to learn. Okay. The ability to just learn something. I have this argument with my wife. My wife is in the health sciences field. And so she is I consider her to be one of the smartest people I've ever met. So if she's ever watching this, she knows. Okay. And she's very gifted at what she does. And we have this conversation all the time about our own children and the process of their education. And I'm different because my education is in liberal arts, which to the health sciences field is like a waste of time. Okay. I studied things like philosophy and history. And I read a lot and I wrote a lot. And, when my oldest child was old enough to ask me, what it is that I got out of university, I told her, I said, I learned how to learn. I went to school to learn how to learn. And that's the critical thinking part. If you have that foundation, you can go in whatever direction your ambition takes you, quite frankly. You can get into law. You can still, go into, something like a physical practice field. I went into technology. I mean, how do you do that? Coming from liberal arts? Well, it's the basis of critical thinking, and it's the basis of learning how to learn something effectively. Right? I think if we have that root in the education system. Now, I'm not an expert on how to actually manifest that, given all the way that we live today. But I do know that it is a fundamental building block that we cannot circumnavigate.
And it's beautiful also because how we are dressed, we seems literally like the yin and yang. You start with art and you move to technology. I start with hardcore technology, and over my career, I made so many human mistakes that I moved completely to study philosophy, to study psychology, or my art, more than 2 decades and a half that I'm deep into the behavioral psychology, into understanding why humans, they were not behaving as a system that I have in my head. So this is the input, this is the human being, this should be the result. And all the time I was scratching my head, probably for this reason, I'm emboldened.
A lot of thinking.
a lot of scratching. Why this human being is not behaving as I suppose that he should. But okay. Absolutely. And this is the perfect bridge, I guess, for moving to the next part. To do continuous learning, we need to be open to learn. Something that human beings, they are not that good to do that. I cannot challenge them enough about this, but also I can absolutely forgive the human being, because we are living in a society where making a mistake, especially with this social network, start to become something that you do something with your best intent, then people, they are looking, watching, recording, sharing, and then they start to create a meme of you. And I see this with young generation, training them. They are scared of failing in front of others because they have this feeling that they will be bullied. I start to see this as a problem.
Yeah, there's bullied, there's it's I mean, bullying is the extreme, but just I think the constant judgment, fear of judgment, and fear of being characterized in one way, I think is a challenge for the current generation.
Yes, especially for their self-esteem and critical thinking, because then when you start to see that all the others, they are treating you like this, you start to doubt yourself and what you're doing, and this is the death of your growth. But the point here is, let's say that we have an environment where finally we can do real agility. So we move toward the Kaizen and Kenkaku principle, and illuminated leadership that puts the skin in the game instead of watching them from the ivory tower, and they want to clearly have a governance that is the OKR. The beautiful part of this is there are many platforms or many systems to do OKRs. Could be the North Star, that is a product-driven way to run OKRs when you have departments that are working on the same product or service. Could be the measure what matters, or could be the radical focus. Of course, radical focus is more startup oriented. Measure what matters is more corporate oriented, where typically I saw that the OKRs are KPI in disguise, like ninjas.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, they. I mean, obviously, you measure them. So there's a results orientation to it, but I don't think that is a bad thing. I think that's what gives that's what sort of puts the wheels onto the organization, right? That it's part of the process of going from A to B, in the execution of your vision or whatever it is that you're doing.
Yes, I agree. If the A to B are designed in a way that are, let's say, multidimensional. So if I move on a map from A to B, I need 3 GPS coordinates. If I look even the time, probably I need also the fourth one, because it could be that I move somewhere that 100 years ago, I don't have a bridge there. So if I move literally from A to B to an engineeristic point of view, I need at least 4 dimensions. That is indeed also what is suggested for an OKRs. That is indeed also what we saw is a good implementation of OKRs if you mix KPI, so indicators, the proper one at the different levels of the organization, with something that I didn't see using that much from no other OKR coach. That is, key result needs to measure a change into the organization, a behavioral change, because we cannot change an organization if we don't change how the organization behaves. What is your takeaway on this? How you measure this?
Yeah, whatever that is, it just has to be measurable, right? So I see a lot of organizations incorrectly using OKRs, and the common theme is I would say a lack of appropriate description of what that key result is, right, and how you're going to measure it. If the key result is increase revenue by 24%, I can measure that, because I have a financial system that allows me to do that. Okay. If you're talking about, organizational change, or things that are far less numerical, observationally numerical, you have to put a lot of thought into them. Otherwise, they become part of a system that nobody believes in anymore, right? So I would almost caution against those sort of what I call like soft key results. That may not be that may not be a key result itself. It's probably an objective, right? So I would classify it this way. So if we're talking about the organizational, let's say that we want to just have a generally better organization to work for. That's our objective. Okay, how do you measure that? What's the key result? Well, it might be something like turnover, right? We want no employees to quit.
Yes, but you see, what you are talking about is what in behavioral engineering we are calling it as sociometric indicators or social indicators. So the intangible could be related with behavioral engineering. This is what I love of applying behavioral engineering to OKRs. You can transform emotional data, a KPI that you cannot measure actually, into something that is tangible, measurable, and you can over time have a chart. Like retention is one of these, but also if we start to measure the sociometry indicators of how people behave in a team, in a department, how they interact, then you start to see if they are in silos or not, if they are working as a silos or if they are working as a team. So these are beautiful stuff that I see the power of OKR with the superpower when you attach the behavioral engineering. And it's so easy for you because you, coming from a philosophical perspective, is you see things on the human side. And then you try to understand with your team where data they can come from.
So one of the fascinating outcomes of that process is a theory developed by a gentleman that I would consider myself to be a student of, is a guy named Simon Wardley. Simon described, he spent a lot of time researching exactly what you're just talking about, but to a point where he arrived at the conclusion that the challenge isn't often related to some of the things that you just discussed, the KPIs, OKRs, or what have you. It is a misalignment of talent and how we think about putting teams together and hiring people and what have you. Okay. So, we're trained, in business school, we're trained to, hire domain expertise that has years of experience doing something. They've got a track record. They've got a pedigree. They went to school. They did all of those kinds of things. They know the job. They know the tactical side of a job. Okay. But what we often miss in doing that is the environmental alignment. So, for example, here's a classic mistake that a lot of founders make in technology companies. They believe, probably because a venture capitalist told them, that they need to go hire the manager from Google or Hewlett Packard or IBM, because that person has a lot of operational experience and you need that person. Okay. And then time after time, you make those hires, you bring them into the organization. And it doesn't matter how good your agile system is or how sophisticated your OKRs are, those resources always end up failing to meet expectations and either being fired or quitting. And we do this over and over and over. And what Simon observed is that the challenge is how we categorize talent in an early stage organization. And he used initial, I think he's changed this since, but his initial analogy to how we should be thinking about talent, to hire is aligned to the stage of the organization or the technology that the organization is building. And he used the metaphor of colonial development. So he said that there are three kinds of people that you can hire into an organization. You can hire a pioneer, you can hire a settler, or you can hire a town planner. Okay. Those are the three distinct skill sets that every professional has, if that can come work in a tech startup. And the challenge is that the mindset and the behavioral expectations of each one of those talent categories is very, very different. And in fact, you don't want, like, for example, you don't want a pioneer involved in the business of planning a town. And you don't want a town planner. In fact, a town planner would never survive, the pioneer lifestyle, right? The pioneer is the founder. It's the first few employees in. It's the people that are crazy enough to get on a boat and sail across the ocean and try and survive. Okay. That is not for everybody. And it is certainly not for the executive that's been in a comfy job at Hewlett Packard for the last 20 years. Okay. Yet we're told, like, this is what we need. We need these operational people. Okay. And we make that, and then they never last. They never survive in the early pioneering environment. And similarly, when you evolve past the pioneering stage of developing a technology company, you need people that are capable of settling it, building the initial establishment, the first customers, in a tech organization. They're a bit of a hybrid of pioneer and town planner. You wouldn't, they're not capable of scaling something, okay, to infinite numbers, industrial scale, if you will, but they're also not the inventor either. Okay. And they play an important role in the development of the organization. And so that thinking, that sort of philosophical approach to talent was hugely influential on me as a young entrepreneur and tech founder. I started to think about people differently, and it also began a journey for me in recognizing that I could focus not on the talent that had a 10-year track record, okay, the way that the HR experts tell you to do it. Instead, focusing on the raw talent that you think can be a part of the next 10 years, not the last 10 years, the next 10 years. The talent that's moldable, that wants to learn, that you could see evolving cross-functionally in an organization, that is capable of going along that journey, with the startup, right? It's a very different way to think about, people inside of early stage or startup organization.
Absolutely. And probably for this reason also, startups, they don't have an HR department.
I mean, it is that right there is that is not a good use of funds if you're focusing on an HR department. But we know, just, I mean, again, we know from, founders worked at other companies and they saw how it was done, or they went to business school and they got an MBA and they learned to understand, from the textbook, what you're supposed to do in trying to run a business or grow a business. But there's another book that was also really influential on me. It was written by Ben Horowitz, who's the co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz. It was called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I have my differences with Ben, as far as our industry is concerned, but what he articulated in terms of founders doing the job of being a founder is right. Right. There's no manual for this. There's no recipe. There's no guidebook. You can only do this job by doing it. You can only exceed and excel at this job by trying it and doing it. And there's, really only a limited amount of people on the planet, I think, that are willing and able to do something like that.
Yes. And I have to tell you that working with corporations where there is a tough HR department, or working with startup, I observed the same, I don't want to call it mistake, let's call it anti-pattern. And I bring back the discussion to the concept of Japan and their impressive philosophy because they have term for everything. So in Japanese, there is the term of ikigai, that is the sense of life. And in their expression of the ikigai, you should live in a way that you connect all the 4 pillars of your life existence. Your passion, what you are good at, what you do for work, and the impact that your work is doing for the others. When you connect these 4 pillars, then you reach the nirvana of your existence. You are ready to move on in the next life, and you have made an impact. Now, if we go back and you connect the ikigai plus the continuous improvement.
Wait, I have to ask something. Now,
Yep.
Tell me there's a tool for that.
In Japan,
there's no tool for that. That is the definition of practice right there.
In Japan, they have something, but I guess it's their differences in cultural aspect, the school. Because you see, and we return to the discussion we were doing before, we have people that they undergo a process from childhood to the maturity where they undergo into school. They have some achievements, then they go on the labor, and then they start to have more achievements. And I don't know you, but I love dogs, so I have dogs all my life, especially Cane Corso, and all the time you go to the breeder, they provide you the pedigree, and the dog has a genealogy that is amazing with all the challenges that they won, championship and everything. To me, when I saw some corporations, I don't see humans. I see dogs, not to offend them, but dogs on a stand with the cockard of I am first classified in the European Championship of Beauty. I am not here to understand what you have achieved in life, because this is past. I'm here to understand what you can do to achieve more in the future. And a lot of these people, they are not open, in my opinion, enough to change. And this is an observation that I have with a lot of high-profile executives or high-profile investors. The world is changing so rapidly that I believe we are not ready for this speed. In long time ago, I wrote an article about DevOps, tracking a timeline of technology disruption that have changed how we live. At that moment, I stop with Kubernetes, I guess, in the chart. Now we have AI, and is from that moment to today is almost 6-7 years. Now quantum is knocking at the door, because it's reality that we start to have investor investing in quantum. I had one in the podcast a few weeks ago. So are we ready for this speed? If people are still thinking that they show you the pedigree on their curriculum, I don't believe so. And we need to understand how we can use this tool that I don't have, unfortunately, to make people realize that they have a purpose in their life. And it's not the pedigree. It's the impact that they will last, because the pedigree will something that will get lost in their coffin. But I don't have a tool, John.
That's what we have to. That's the next startup. We need to make a tool for that.
Painkiller. Yes. Good. I see the time is moving too fast, and I'm thinking what to touch now. I have so many questions still. I could go forever talking with you, but to don't bother too much our audience with a podcast that lasts 8 hours. Do you have, I guess, with a mug of coffee enough filled, we can go ahead for that much.
For sure, I can go on and on. I mean, these are this. I mean, I love this conversation. This is these are important conversations to have, and I think as it as it relates to coming back to purpose, why we do these things is super important, and in arguably, the most important, thing is to have purpose in what we're doing, right? And to have a firm belief that, we're making a difference. I mean, it's ironic. I left my last startup in 2022 and it was not a good experience for me. And, I said, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to, I'm done with, the founder experience and what have you. And then, what did I do? I with my business partner, I went and created a new company. That's what NextWave is. I find myself doing it all over again, but it's different in the sense that, our purpose, like my purpose now, is very different. I'm not here to build, a technology, in a specific industry or what have you. I'm here to try and improve the condition for founders and investors, because we need both groups in order for innovation to take place. And all of the things that we've talked about is really important to that solution, or, again, the root cause, okay, treating the root cause of the problem. But, it's also about, trying to introduce innovation. I mean, at the end, I have a saying, right? A founder is what a founder does. I can't observe, problems like these that we face in our industry of innovation. Like, I'll call it either investing or building. I can't observe the problems and really do nothing about them. Like, I can't. Maybe that's the DNA. Maybe that's the disease. Maybe that's the DNA flaw. The genetic flaw of founders is this inability to recognize a problem and a way to solve it, and then do nothing about it. All right. I think in building NextWave, again, all the things we talked about, sort of come back to me in the sense that this is what we do. So, I mean, going to get a job inside of a big company. I mean, can you imagine? I can't. I don't know if I could do that. I'm not wired for that.
I love to go and help big companies to get out of the swamp, typically, but I won't go to work with them. Yeah, absolutely. That is, yes, that is indeed what is the purpose of why I do the podcast, and why I help people with the open source version of the Software Craftsmanship Dojo, because democratizing the blueprint of technical excellence will help these startups to know what they should implant in their daily DNA activity. The behavior of people, they have to be rooted in this blueprint, because this is the blueprint that I observe in Formula One, in MotoGP, in high-performing environment, where engineering applied to IT is normal. It's not AI stuff that you plug and then you talk with your ChatGPT and the code is appearing by magic and nobody knows what it does. You need to be a good engineer, enhanced with AI, and probably in the future with quantum, to get out of your brain working, collaborating with others, the best of the intellect of the team.
So there's, this is a separate follow-up topic about this. Okay. So is AI the great liberator or the great enslaver? And on our next episode,
I tell you something shortly, and and then we will record the next episode with a different mug of coffee. But I have an interesting discussion a few weeks ago with an investor that she is investing in healthcare. And we were discussing about the application of AI on healthcare. And she got a point that was fantastic. If you want to search for her, is Ute Merker. Is a fantastic lady in Germany. And she told me, Mike, AI to enhance the doctor in the diagnostic, AI for therapy, there are lives on stake. So this hybrid model that I wrote about, I don't remember how many episodes in the past, in the Forge of Unicorns, seems to be in one of the highly regulated environments like healthcare, the nowadays standards, the de facto standard. AI will help people to become better, like a skeleton that is enhancing your human potential in performance, like in the army. But thinking that AI will take over everything probably is too much, too risky. We are not ready for that yet. Maybe in the future, who knows? But now, would you go to, for instance, a surgery with a doctor that a surgeon that is robot AI driven? And I want to close with this question for everybody.
I mean, it depends. I mean, in the prototype phase, probably not. As the concept matures, I definitely see that possibility. The thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about these days is the process of technology evolution from technology always begins from a position of liberation. So the concept that you're talking about, where you can have, we know that, computer precision is always preferred over human guesswork. Okay. And so therefore applied to, I don't know, robotic surgery or what have you, I could see the computational outcome of that being very good. Okay. And highly predictable. And that's not a bad thing. Okay. And so technology always begins out as like the great liberator. The internet is a great example, the great liberator. It has arguably, according to some people, become the great enslaver, right? It evolves along this curve of, moving from liberation to enslavement. And, misuse, yes. Okay. But what is misuse? Misuse to one person is purpose to another. I think about that a lot in the context of, AI, and I think about that in the context of where we're going in this machine economy and the idea of machines communicating and transacting with each other. Okay. And obviously I can see it immediately as the great liberator, but where it ends is potentially almost a dystopian enslavement of humankind. And I'm conscious of that. I'm mindful of that because I know that what I'm doing in my own business, my own practice of NextWave is potentially fueling that process. Okay. We're early and it's hard to recognize the signs now, but let's have this conversation 5 or 6 years from now, 10 years from now. It could be very different. And, from my perspective, this kind of comes back around to the necessity of ensuring that we build this world, using principles of open source, but also principles of open access. Okay. What made the internet the great liberator is the participatory nature of it, the open participatory nature of the internet itself. And I think that the resolution of that, as we try to manage this era of autonomy, is going to come down to a philosophical and regulatory conversation about control. Who has control and who doesn't? Okay. The idea that the machine economy is controlled by the government or a handful of Silicon Valley companies scares me to death. Okay. It's very frightening to think about that way. So, I again, first principles observation of that problem. What I want to do is invest in the innovators who can help build that open access, open source foundation to all of this. Right. I think that is that's a tenet, if you will, of an investing thesis that we need to live by if we're going to go build this.
Yes, and to echo to what you just said, there is a fantastic book with Professor Varoufakis, about the techno-feudalism. That is indeed this analysis from the ex-minister of economy in Greece about the monopoly of these tech giants and what they can create. It's a thought-provoking book. I don't want to tell you what I think about it. It helped me to think the next critical thinking process of, okay, what if? But the point, to return to your observation, I guess that you nailed it. As a cancer survivor, I usually say it's like the nuclear energy. You can use it to create a nuclear power plant and resolving the problems of energy consumption. You can use to cure the cancers, and they open me like a pig, but I'm here. Or you can use it to create an H-bomb. And instead of saving life or providing life with energy, you can destroy lives. History is made of this. Humankind are made of this. They create, abuse, destroy, and then the regulation arrives to tell you, hey guys, you cannot drop H-bomb here and there because you want to show off. I have the feeling that this is how, since millennia ago, we evolved. So I am indeed with the thinking that looking at the past, we will use AI, we will abuse AI, we will get the backfire of it, and then we will create regulations. And I guess that the regulation that will come abusing AI is to create standards about software. This is what I feel, because I see too many companies that are investing too much money into the AI bandwagon. That is not a bad thing per se, because to innovate, we need to pump money in research and development, but the blind trust that this is the tool that will do the painkiller of their problems, they will get a harsh awakening in a while, when their system will be unmanageable anymore, because nobody knows how to touch the code base. Or, as I was discussing with the podcast about quantum, where the quantum power in the hybrid system will overpower the security of all the system that we have out there on the field now. And to let people understand the paradigm, I would love that you go and look about the disaster of Log4j, the library that opened all the mess long time ago. Imagine to have this security disaster or the CrowdStrike security disaster of last summer at scale. That an hacker can hack your security in a blink of an eye. Then what? Then probably we have to regulate quantum. Then we need to regulate security. But it's this trial error that I believe is on the edge. And I'm happy that AI is actually abused, because I believe that soon it will help us to regulate the environment of IT, bringing engineering finally on the field, so that we have finally coders and engineers. Coders is who press the keyboard and codes. Engineers are who is able to holistically design from ideation to delivery the product or services in a multidisciplinary team. But I guess we have to do another episode in the future. That I would be more than happy to do that.
Let's tackle one big giant problem at a time. Or maybe we could build the OKRs around that, and we could meet about it regularly.
Yes, we can probably start also to help people to understand better how to use the OKR, how to use agility, how to use software engineering properly, using the philosophy of open source. So I am more than happy to work on this project with you and your partners. Yes. John, I see that the time is ticking. Do you have anything else that you want to add to our listeners? Any suggestion, recommendation?
No, I think just sort of like looking at the things that we thought we would be relevant to talk about. I think we touched on almost everything that you and I had talked about prior. So yeah, it's been a fun conversation. I really enjoy it. And these are the conversations I think that we as a discipline in tech building have to have on a regular basis.
Thank you. I love it as well. It's always beautiful to talk with another critical thinker, something not that usual nowadays, trust me. I'm pleased to have done this chat with you. Good. Dear listeners and digital warriors out there, the field is tough. We hope that today we have provided you some insights. For more insights, subscribe to the Forge of Unicorn newsletter. Check it out of what John is doing. Ask John to collaborate if you have some good ideas, and we will see out there in the field fighting for digital evolution. See you. John, thank you so much, and see you soon.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure, John. See you soon with the episode 2 with another mug of coffee. Bye.
Thanks for listening, and please remember to subscribe to the Forge of Unicorns to stay up to date with our latest episodes.